the requirements, the demands on executives or entrepreneurs are so insane. Every day you're expected to peak. Physiologically, psychologically, it's just not possible.
That psychological battle is difficult. I still find it incredibly challenging, running a business. Now I'm getting better at, well, yeah, you might fail, but you've got to keep going for it anyway.
Yeah.
Well, what are we doing this for?
It's tough.
No, but
good question.
I know
good
why.
question.
But I know why we're doing it for. This is the best job I've ever had.
Yeah, this is the best job I've ever had. It's the only job I ever want.
Yeah.
But I don't ever want to pretend that it's easy. Welcome to today's episode of Well On Our Way, a podcast where we dive into the challenges, the struggles, the highs and the lows of running a business and the direct impact it has on your well-being. My guest today is Scott Armstrong, the founder of Mentl, a mental health advocacy platform. He has an insane amount of journalism experience. He's a great guy, and he's building a platform that's really, really needed. Enjoy today's show. Scott, welcome.
Gary, how are you this morning?
Good. How about you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
We're diving straight in, okay?
Diving straight in.
On your LinkedIn bio, it says your mission with Mentl is to equip the future generations with better tools to manage their mental health or be aware of the mental health than what we had growing up, or in past generations. So paint me a picture of what the future looks like for your daughter, Autumn, and for my young sons, Maxwell and Oscar. What does the future look like for them with regards to mental health?
I think it's a future where they are far more aware of the external forces on their mental health, but also have more tactics. They have more knowledge about how to protect and enable their own mental health. I grew up in a household that was ruled by fear and anger. I loved my dad and my mum and dad very much, but I was an insecure child, went into a world of work where there is a lot of unspoken insecurity. There's a lot of toxicity. And we lived and grew up in quite a simpler age than our children are growing up now. And those external forces, when we talk about social media, when we talk about technology, the unintended consequences of technology on particularly children's mental health. I see the research on, the earlier a child gets a smartphone, the more their mental health is damaged. So looking to the future, it's a more educated person that knows what social media might be doing to them, what technology might be doing to them, knows to have good habits, to mitigate that, when to turn it off, when to disconnect, how to embrace physical health, how to embrace meditation, just better awareness. So they can continue to be happy, because we can see that our young people are not happy right now.
Yeah, no, it's worrying. We're going to come back to that in a bit. You touched on your early years, your childhood. Give me a memory or an instance or a point in your childhood that's stuck with you and maybe shaped you, shaped who you are today.
A number. I mean, so my father was a very angry man, and he wasn't a very happy man, and I understood the drivers of that. His first marriage failed. There was a lot of shouting. There was a lot of I was one of that generation where children should be seen and not heard. Whereas now it's completely
quite the opposite. You
So
worry if you can't see or hear them, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference now.
I mean, and it was, and that kind of that anger every day, it does have its own toxic effect on you. I remember me and my brother were playing football, and we lost the football. He went into a little river, and we couldn't tell our dad. We were so frightened of telling our dad what had happened that we told him that some boys had stolen the football. He then put us in the car, and we had to drive around the village for 4 hours looking for these imaginary. We never told him, but but it's that. So again, I understood what had shaped him, but that had a real impact on us. And eventually, when you're told not to speak, you then get into the habit of not speaking. I ended up getting bullied at school. I ended up, trying to hide away from the world a bit. I ended up, I was a geek at school, quite insecure. And then in later life, to try and break the mold on that, as soon as I was 18 years old, actually 16 years old, I went into the world of work. You're drinking straight away to try and find your voice again. So it took me a very long time to find my voice.
And you mentioned your dad demonstrated anger or was a very angry man, I think the word you used. At what point did you start to understand that? Because for a long time it's just fear, I guess. At what point did that kind of
I think
change?
it was
you
much
start to
later. It
understand
was much later in life. He got remarried, and that's always showed me, like, if you're in a situation where you're happy, how that changes an individual. Like my younger brother, we always talk about it. You know, JJ and my sister Danielle, because he got remarried and he was happy. And the dad they had compared to the dad I had were two very different individuals.
Right.
So I think it was much later in life I recognised, you know, how he was angry. I mean, he came up with a bit of a chip on his shoulder as well, because he came from one of the most poverty-stricken sink estates in the UK. Like his mum and dad were basically below the poverty line.
Yeah.
You know, so he pulled himself up by his own bootstraps.
Yeah.
But he also faced a lot of class prejudice coming up. You know, he was a very bright guy. He got into grammar school. He represented his county at various sports. So he was in a grammar school with children from, you know, better financial situation.
Means, yeah.
So he often got picked on, and he learned to punch life in the face, and that was his pretty much response would be like, you know. So it was anger and swift to act, I think, was how he survived coming up.
So it sounds like then you were dealing with this anger and you know, those kind of emotions at an early age. How did that impact you? So how did you deal with your anger and your emotions, and how did that kind of impact your resilience, I guess?
That's a fascinating question, and I think it's one I'm only just really unpacking very, very late in life. I went into a number of things. You know, I think it manifested in imposter syndrome, which drove me to work very, very hard. I never got to university. There was a family breakup. I spent a little bit of time sort of couch surfing and homeless, technically homeless, which wasn't fun at sort of teenage years. But I ended up working at 16 for a newspaper, first job. And having had that salvation of a job, I basically worked very, very hard, as many people with imposter syndrome do. Was very hard on myself for a number of years. Also drank heavily for a number of years, and didn't really acknowledge or recognize the emotions. And again, when you talked about our children, I hope that they can grow up recognizing what's going on with them, because I basically did what my dad did, which was bury them in partying and alcohol and basically going out, you know, and work. And literally for, I would say for decades, I defined myself by my job title. You know, it took me a long time to recognize that Scott the journalist wasn't Scott. The job was something I do rather than somebody I am. So that was a tricky one to figure out.
Yeah, I think for me, actually, it was more the hours that I worked than the title. You know, for the longest of time, it would be how many hours can I put in, how hard can I work, you know, and you just lose so much in that process, you know, not just time with loved ones or identity or whatever, but yeah, I think there's definitely a generational shift already, and how we guide our young ones, our kids up to be able to kind of manage emotions, manage their time, manage the, you know, the resources that they have is critical. I'm going to go back a step. You mentioned imposter syndrome. I've been to a number of your panel discussions and you know, talks and presentations, and you mention this quite often. So I'm going to dig in a little bit. You said at an early age, you know, it manifested. You know, imposter syndrome manifested from, you know, where you were or the situation you were in. Why do you think it developed in that first instance?
It goes back to the family. You know, when you basically grow up with this idea that you're not good enough, and we see that time and time again. Like, I know the science of it now. You know, like, and what we don't realize as parents is often that literally, if anything's going wrong, we as the children assume it's our fault. But often we're told, or our generation of children were told it was our fault, you know, and get to your room and be quiet and be silent and don't disturb us. Because again, that generation have seen and not be heard. And I see this today in workforces where, you know, good workforces are ones where people are seen and heard and feel that they can contribute. Whereas I grew up in a house where we were told you shouldn't contribute, you're not good, you know. So you do grow up feeling that you're not good enough. And that's a feeling that has persisted most of my life. It's only the last, and I still have it today, you know. And as an entrepreneur and as somebody on a mission, like manifests itself differently. You know, I'm now no longer trying to please management, shall we say, but then you still got your own opinion of yourself, and when it works, when you win, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
But when you go through the lows and the challenges, it's really, because you are often your own worst enemy. I am often my own worst enemy. Well,
Well, yeah, I can relate there. I think, building a business is possibly one of the hardest things you can ever do. We're going to touch on that shortly. But linking to that, you mentioned kind of like your upbringing and you know the imposter syndrome kind of started at an early age, and it's followed you. Is it fair to say as through your career? I'm keen to dig in on that a little bit more, because I'm sure it will help people question themselves and if they have any self-doubt, you know, the purpose of this, and building on the incredible work you do, by the way. And I should have said this at the start. You know, I've always said I'm your biggest fan when it comes to the work you're doing, because it's such an important topic. But you know, the purpose of this podcast is to really reflect on entrepreneurs and business leaders who are making tremendous sacrifice, both health, well-being, financial, emotional, time, everything. And I think shedding light on that is so important, because it's done often behind the scenes, and all you get to see is the shiny stuff, the wins, right? But for every win, there's probably 99 losses or failures, right? And I think that's why it's so important for us to shine light on that and build on the great work you're doing from a mental health perspective. But it's not only mental health that's impacted when you're an entrepreneur. You're impacted in so many ways. So going back, just finishing on your early years for a moment, what do you think gave you that entrepreneurial spirit and that grit and resilience that enables you to actually become an entrepreneur in the first place and then stick to it?
Well, I spent, not unfortunately, because we all are called to it at the right time, I guess, for us. I mean, I spent 30 years working for other people and often toying with the idea that one day I'd go and do my own thing. I mean, I wanted to be an author. I was a journalist. Every journalist thinks they've got a buck in them, whether they have or not. But I came to entrepreneurship late, you know, because I didn't believe in myself. I felt for nearly 3 decades that I needed somebody else to pat me on the top of the head, even though I was like at the top of my game. I was holding senior management, you know, I was editor-in-chief and all that sort of thing. You were always seeking somebody else's approval. And I think that imposter syndrome held me back. You know, if we talk about self-limiting beliefs, I mean, I really held myself back for a long time. And it was only, I don't know, maybe I was coming up to 50. You know, I went through almost a perfect storm of situations. You know, I came up against some toxic workplaces that really kind of showed me the power that management have over their employees. I lost my father to mental health. I changed careers, which was a bizarre thing that really was quite painful to go through, but actually very freeing. And I think once I'd broken that mold of this is who I am, I was then able to go, oh, do you know what? Let's think a bit more freely here and back yourself. I mean, I look back across my career and I've done some incredible things in my career, none of which I've owned, you know, because I look at them and it's almost like something else somebody else did. You go, that was good. But it's not, oh no, I did a good thing. You know, I don't recognize my successes. So I held myself back for a long time. So I think self-belief for an entrepreneur is super important, because there's going to be plenty of external circumstances that pull us down, and lots of people that will say don't do it. You know, and sometimes the only thing we've got going for us is self-belief. You mentioned that you were late to the party, so to speak. But then you said before that it kind of happens when it happens. Right. So, and I think there's a misconception that, you know, entrepreneurship or building a business is a young person's game. When if you look at the stats, actually some of the most successful businesses have been started by people in their 40s or 50s. So, you know, what do you think about that in terms of, you know, someone coming out of university like myself, and I had the opposite pathway to you, and I don't think my pathway is right or wrong, or yours is right or wrong. It was just different. But, you know, what do you think around someone starting a business from the age of 20 versus someone starting a business at the age of 50, and
the just incredible difference in pathways that can create.
And I think there's something to be said for, you know, every pathway. I guess what I learned over 30 years were a series of business processes, whether they worked, whether they were good ones or bad ones. I had the time to get good at something, you know, a particular skill, which often, and you know, the minute you enter into the world of entrepreneurship, you're pulled everywhere, and you have to, if not master, become adept at a number of skills. Whereas the world of work does give you the time to focus on a single discipline, shall we say, and then get good at that. That has built the foundations for what I do now, because, you know, I can tell good stories, I can reach people, I know how to do that, and I've had time to develop that skill and master. Well, it seems a little bit, there's the imposter syndrome kicking in again. But I've had the ability to get good at it. That said, you know, what would Scott have achieved if he'd believed in himself enough to actually pursue something decades ago? Even a decade ago, where would I be now? I don't know, really. You can't really pull at the threads of your past life, and because often, it's not possible, but what's the point?
No, absolutely.
So, I think if someone's got the belief and the passion and they want to go for it, I don't think it matters about the age. I do think I benefit from at least a little bit. Well, I'd say that. I mean, you'd say emotional maturity, but I still find it incredibly challenging, you know, running a business. And perhaps even more aware of it. Now, and again, and I'm probably rambling here as well, but, you know, I know what this means to my family for me to succeed. So, or to fail. So the stakes are higher, perhaps, than your 20-year-old coming in, because often, you know, they can go and get a job and it's not going to impact their mortgage payments, or it's not going to impact their daughter's school placing or your health insurance and that sort of thing. So it's an interesting step in your sort of 40s and 50s to throw yourself into a business. I think it takes a lot of courage, and I love seeing the work that people are doing. And, you know, Gary, you build this business and you built it into an incredible business, but I know how hard that's been.
Oh yeah, big time
for you.
No, and I think we don't talk enough around family and particularly kids and the pressure that brings when building a business. And I think it's just not spoken about. And I've seen in myself how my risk tolerance has changed since, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, when I just had huge appetite for risk, you know, would do whatever it took to get the business moving forward, and didn't really matter what happened, because, well, I would figure out a way. I'm a grown up, I'll be able to sort something out. But now I have two young boys to take care of and think about them. Like you said, their school, not just their school fees and health insurance, actually just beyond that. Like, I need to be available for them. Right. I need to be going home and being, and I say going home because I'm increasingly working outside, away from home, because they're so loud and distracting, which is another point. And I think, again, there's still a lot of talk around work from home and remote working, but for parents with young kids, working from home is extremely difficult. So, I mean,
we're talking a couple of days after the big storm, you know, and my daughter has been online learning. She did a little bit, but there's been basically, it's been a house full of kids with play dates to keep them occupied, you know, and in the bedroom next door, I've got a concert going on with them all, you know, singing firework at the top of their voices in different abilities.
Nicely put.
While you're then trying to focus and do a deep dive on, you know, yesterday I was researching tools to do an online survey and that sort of thing. We're trying to get to grips with pieces of technology that I've got no idea how to do it again. And there's a little bit at the moment going, I might be going slightly mad here.
Definitely.
So it is tricky.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, like I said, in terms of the impact on your health and well-being, particularly mentally and emotionally, when you have kids and you're building a business, it's just a whole different layer that I just don't think gets really spoken about. No. I saw a really good LinkedIn post, and I can't remember who did it. I wish I could, because I give them a shout out. But, you know, when you see a lot of these posts around entrepreneurship and glamorizing them, if you will, you know, people working insane hours and blah, 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 which was me, right? And I was the most guilty of that. But it does change when you have kids. And, you know, whether you're a working father or a working mother, but just a working parent, you know, there's these insane extra demands that you have to manage. And, you know, I've gone from pitching to venture capital funds, you know, 5 p.m. for an hour, and then at 6 p.m. I'm upstairs on bath duty, you know, wiping bums, drying them, getting them in the bath, and that's just life.
One could argue that the venture capitalism is not that different, really.
Yeah, well, yeah. I won't go there. I won't go there. But, you know, it's just that roller coaster of just the person that you are.
Yeah.
You know, at one point I'm the CEO raising capital for a technology business. The next point I'm towel boy for my two lads. So, you know, so it's a very hard. I don't want to call it a balance, but you have multiple hats and characters, I guess. And I need to bring that character to my boys that they deserve, and I need to make sure I can bring the character that I need to be at work in equal force. So I think that, you know, it's something that doesn't get spoken about enough, particularly the impact on both the kids and you as a parent, and then the business.
I mean, the thing I'm trying to work on, and I wouldn't say I'm anywhere close, but it's, you know, rather than actually be the character in different roles, I'm trying to be Scott at all points, whether it be in the CEO, founder, entrepreneur, mental health advocate role, and equally Scott as the dad, as the father, you know, and kind of trying to learn from that lesson of 30 years of going, I'm an editor-in-chief. And the minute you take that away from me, it literally took me 6 months to get any sense of, you know, I literally felt my world had been turned upside down, even though I'd gone from a career I'd known into strategic communications, and PR, which is actually not that big a leap, but just losing the title that I called myself all my life really had a massive psychological impact on me. And it was very freeing, but it was a very, very painful process to go through. And having gone through that process of breaking that label, breaking that mold, I think I'm a little bit more able to actually be, right, Scott's in the center and he's going to go and do that and he's going to go and do that, but he remains Scott, as opposed to, right, now Scott's going to put his CEO hat on. Now Scott's going to go and put his podcast hat on. Now Scott's going to put his dad hat on. That's very much a work in progress, but I think that's the destination I'm trying to get to.
I think authenticity is key, right? In terms of just being your authentic self 100% of the time, if you can. But, you know, for me, and again, I'm not afraid to share the battles. It's a case of, you know, literally in a 5-minute window, you can go from deep diving into 3-year financial models, you know, hugely technical, complicated, you know, P&L accounts, etc., to talking to my 4 or 2-year-old about Blippi, right? So, like, cognitively, it's quite a hard mental switch to keep making. And I think the thing I have found is what has become more difficult over time is when I switch off from work mode to dad or parent mode, it's very hard to switch back on again. Whereas when I was younger and had no kids, I just stayed on work mode. And I think that's the difference. It's hard to kind of manage those fluctuations.
And the thing I have struggled with this as well. At the same time, I recognize that the job I'm doing now is the best job I've ever had. And I'm terrified that might one day finish. You know, I don't want to go back into the world of work, or mainstream work, shall we say. I want to carry on with this journey. But what I have noticed is those emotional swings. And now my emotions are much closer to the surface. I mean, man, at Christmas, like, I cry at films all the time now. Literally, my emotions are literally swinging all the time. So, you know, we did the Mentl Awards, which, you know, congratulations, level 1 of the Mentl Awards.
Thank you.
Organising that event, like, I was on a it was overwhelming. I needed therapy on the way up to build, you know, to deliver it, because at one point I nearly got overwhelmed because I was doing so many things for the first time. Delivered it, incredible night, massive high. The next day, brilliant. The day after that and throughout the Christmas, just crash, because you're there, and then you've basically climbed a mountain, and then you realise that you've got to do that all again. You look up again and go, oh, you know, and it's for so many people, and I've struggled. You know, how do you pick yourself up and go, right, I'm going to climb another mountain today, and I'm going to climb another mountain today, and I might fall off that mountain. You know, so,
and sometimes multiple times a day, right? I think the thing that I've always been guilty of is not celebrating when you reach the top. and I'm still not very good at that. And I think the thing that I've also found is that it's absolutely like climbing a mountain. And yes, you reach the top, but the other side is not a mountain going down; it's a cliff.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you climb all the way up, you reach that peak for a very, very short period of time, and then you're off that cliff and you're back at the bottom.
Yeah.
And,
Instantly.
And it's hard. It's very hard to
and that
to
gap
manage
between there and the bottom, from the peak to the bottom, is it's massive. And as you say, like, you spend days, weeks, months, years climbing, steadily getting to your destination. And the next minute, it's all gone.
Yeah.
I've listened to so many podcasts with elite athletes that, the minute they achieve whether it be the gold medal or the World Cup final, and then they descend into alcoholism and depression because that thing they were chasing all their life,
no longer there.
It's no longer there. And we are at danger as well of ascribing too much. We have been sold this concept that the minute we arrive at a destination, the minute, I own that nice house, or I own that car, or I achieve this thing, then I will be whole as a human being. And it's not, because life continues beyond it. And it's rough.
No, totally. And I think you have to try and train yourself to enjoy the journey, as cliche as it sounds, because if you don't, before you know it, it's behind you and you've missed all of those opportunities. And I think that's something I am getting better at, in terms of appreciating.
Can you teach me?
Well, I'll try my best. Appreciating the challenges for what they are, appreciating the progress for what it is. Also, managing expectations is a really hard thing to do as an entrepreneur or a business owner or a founder. I think that's something that I'm getting a little bit better at. I think the team may have different opinions, but we'll look forward to the comments on that one. So I think that's it is a challenge, but how you manage that most epic of emotional roller coasters is arguably one of the biggest challenges that if you overcome as an entrepreneur, then you're good. But probably for most people, it gets the better of them.
And I understand it, because I've seen the challenge in myself. It's tough, and particularly when it's something that and this I think will be true of most entrepreneurs, is that what we're trying to build is often something that's intensely personal. So you might be delivering a job for a company, but that's not you. It's not. And if the product doesn't sell, that's not a rejection of you as a human being. But when it's your personal passion project, it's a lot harder to make that distinction. When someone says, no, I don't want to be involved in this, or I don't want to sponsor this, or I don't want to be in your podcast, or I don't want to do this. It's very difficult not to take it personally. And you're like, but why? Why are you? And this is, I've seen this a lot in myself, and I'm really trying to do that. But you'll see somebody go and choose a different entrepreneur, in your space, and go, right, we're going there. And you'd be like, but what about me? You never even came and spoke to me. And actually what we should be doing is going, well, good for you. And I am getting much, much better at going, good for you. And just because, their success does not diminish me.
No.
If anything, you've got to get to that point where we're going, well, they've done that. How did they do that? Okay, so
can I learn?
Go and make that contact. Go and introduce yourself. But it is that kind of like, I think we're very easy and very quick to criticize ourselves. And when you become an entrepreneur, that gets a lot easier to do.
Massively heightens, no, totally. So we've made a good link there. Mentl, you started, when did you start Mentl?
About 20 months ago, maybe.
So coming up to 2 years.
Coming up to 2 years.
Tell us a little bit about Mentl and how you arrived at the concept originally and turned that into a business.
It was a concept that was born out of lived experience, really. I mentioned my dad. He died at 68 years old, and basically he was struggling with depression, couldn't talk to me, couldn't talk to anybody about it, really. He lost control of alcohol. I mean, he was a drinker for most of his life, but lost control of alcohol during that time, and drank himself to death in the space of 3 months. And I remember, and I've always cited this, but I do genuinely remember looking down at his body in the open casket and talking to him, but knowing he's not there. I'm actually talking to myself, going, we never talked about this. We've never talked about mental health. We never talked about our feelings. And I'm talking to myself basically. So I think at that point I started to have a conversation with me about what was going on with me. I did then, and when I lost my dad, I was some way into that change of roles. So I was already all over the shop emotionally anyway. Came back, left one job, went into another, which I quickly left because I went back into journalism and found it to be more toxic than I remembered.
Right.
And maybe that's not the profession's fault. Maybe I had been changed by my father's passing and my own journey.
Yep.
Went to another role that was also quite toxic. And then in the last role, I really wanted to focus on sort of the human condition. So I was running a business title, which can remain unnamed. But I wanted to focus on whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion, or the future of work. I took over during the pandemic, and I wanted to help and lift up, which didn't sit so well with my paymasters. And the more they tried to take it away from me, the more I wanted to lean into mental health and the benefits of that. And it kind of came out of that. It was like that lived experience of loss and of experiencing cultures that I didn't think fit. For so many years, I basically was a people pleaser and said yes. For too many years. And then once I'd come out of that and I went back in, I was like, no, I don't want to do this anymore.
Didn't feel good.
Didn't feel good. Didn't feel right. And I was at that point. I think I'd remembered, or either rediscovered or remembered, what my truly important values were. And I think so many people during COVID got back in touch with their values and going, well, this is what I want to do. And I was hitting 50 as well, so I don't know, maybe that's kind of like a temporal milestone.
Yeah,
so it's
psychological one.
Yeah. So it was kind of time to make a change. So that's why I kind of came up with this concept of as a mental health advocacy platform to try and convince companies that they didn't need to treat people, the way I'd been treated, or indeed when I first got into management, treated people, because I was become the abuser. I was a very poor leader for a very long time. It took me a while to discover that other people's success was my success rather than they were there to fuel my success, if you know what I mean. When the team wins, you win, as opposed to the other way. The team's there to try and, fulfill your destiny or whatever you want to call it. I launched that business and we've been growing ever since. We need to grow more. It's
always,
constant. It's a constant.
When don't
journey.
you?
But it is, as I say, it is still the best job I've ever had, because hopefully at the end of the day we are helping, and that feels good.
Well, you definitely are. You definitely are, and like I said, I'm a big fan, and that's why I'm excited to have you on here today and talk about it even more, but hopefully talk about it from a slightly different angle to what you may have spoken about it before, because normally you're the one sitting in my seat grilling people with questions. So this is quite an honour and a privilege. So.
Well, and thank you for giving me a little bit more empathy to my interviewees now.
But so let's reflect for a little bit. 20 months. You said, you started this business, after you turned 50. So you had 30 years of work experience.
Stability, you could almost say.
Yep. Life experience as well. Plus now a wife and a daughter, young daughter at this point. We must always give credit to the wives and the kids, because they give us that reason, I guess, that purpose, but also the emotional, mental, support that you need to keep going just when you think you can't. So let's give them a quick shout out, and but let's also reflect on the last 20 months, because I suspect the last 20 months has in some cases felt like 20 days, but in some cases felt like 20 years. And you're smiling, which means I might be right.
You are.
So for those that are listening as opposed to watching, yes, I think I might be right with that one. So let's start on you talk a lot about mental health. Obviously, that's your platform.
Yeah.
I'm going to a little bit the other side first in terms of physical health and well-being, because when you're so invested in building a business and you're so focused and almost everything else gets forgotten about, typically what gets forgotten about first is your own physical health.
Absolutely.
Right? So whether that's not enough movement, not standing enough, sitting hunched over a laptop on a desk too many hours a day, not exercising, not playing sport, blah, 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 blah. How has the last 20 months starting and growing Mentl affected you physically? Let's start there.
Roller coaster. And it's been difficult to try and maintain good habits. You know, when I first started, before things started getting really busy, it's kind of a little easier because you go, oh yeah, I'm going to build out that time. I'm going to build out that time. I'm going to build out that time. And I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then things, you end up, but that's before you then win business. And then you've got that responsibility to deliver.
Yeah.
And, you know, you could be at an event all day and you will survive on coffee and all your habits, you know, good habits go out the window straight away. I've tried to get better. I've tried to put some structure in. I have like one of those calendar apps of which I block off till 10 a.m. in the morning. And I try, but it's very easy to get out the habit. And the minute you stop, that's it. You know, it can take you weeks to get back into the good habit. So physically, it's been a roller coaster. I mean, I have done more triathlons while I've been, you know, an entrepreneur than I have when I was in the mainstream working life. But at the same time, the cycles of inactivity have also been in there. So, you know, the poor habits, the surviving on coffee because you're delivering events and that kind of thing. So it's, which I'm not going to beat myself up about too much. You know, I think I'm getting better, but it's been tough, you know, because no day is the same. So you've got to be, I think you've got to be as disciplined, and it's not something it's something I'm learning rather than something I've achieved. You've got to put as much discipline into your own health as to the business's health, because the thing I'm beginning to recognize is that they're inextricably linked. Like if you're 100%. In a bad way, then the business isn't going to do well. And you know, and I'm coming off the back of, you know, Christmas and New Year, and delivering the awards, and starting the year fairly flat, you know, and trying to pick myself up and build momentum.
Well, like
again.
we said, falling off that cliff, right?
Falling off
Whether
the
that's
cliff.
mentally, physically, like those cycles are real. And I think, you know, I've always looked at kind of comparing business owners, entrepreneurs, business leaders to athletes. And there's some great studies around corporate athlete and executive athlete. And I think for me, it's so true in the sense that the requirements, the demands on executives or entrepreneurs are so insane. But the difference between athletes and executives or entrepreneurs is that the athletes train to peak perform, right? Like professional footballers will train throughout the week to peak on a Wednesday in the Champions League or on a Saturday or Sunday in the Premier League. They will train and recover, and we'll come on to recovery in a minute, during the week, you know, in between times. Whereas for us, for entrepreneurs, for executives, for people in business, every day you're expected to peak. Like physiologically, psychologically, it's just not possible. And I think that's the fundamental flaw that exists in business, is that every day cannot be the same in the sense of peak performance. So I think that's something that I've gotten better with over time, to try and accept that some days will be slower, will be flatter, whereas others will need to peak, as opposed to trying to get 100% out of every day. I think it's that kind of psychological regulation that's really the challenge, because you just expect.
That's very true. And you'll set yourself goals. And particularly, you know, if you're working from home and you've got kids who are around you know, at home, it's a difficult challenge enough to then you'll set yourself goals and go, right, I'm going to do these 5 things today. And in the end, you only do one or 2.
Yeah.
And then what's the conversation you have? Like, do you criticize yourself? You're calling yourself a loser because you didn't do all of those things, and you feel like then tomorrow you're going to be further behind, rather than going, okay, well, I took 2 steps forward today rather than 5, but I took 2 steps forward. So that psychological battle is difficult. Then when you throw in the fact that it's so easy to comfort eat, to comfort drink, to comfort not exercise, to binge TV. You know,
or convenience eat, in the sense of, I haven't got time to cook, therefore I'll order. And it's not just a case of I'm eating comfort food. Actually, I'm just eating the quickest thing I can so I can keep going and doing more. And I think if we go back to the athlete kind of analogy, in that, you know, particularly athletes such as sprinters, like they're training to run for 10 seconds, right? So their peak is 10 seconds every 4 years, right? If you're talking about the Olympics, footballers, 90 minutes, right? But 90 minutes every 3 or 4 days. Yeah. Whereas for us, we expect 8, 10, 12 hours of
a day
of insane, you know, incredible output every single day. It's just not possible. And that's the reality. And I think whilst I know that, I still expect. Right? And I think that's like I said, that's the juggle that, or the internal fight, I guess, that still exists.
And you will, as an entrepreneur, spend a lot of time in a space outside of where you will be comfortable, learning new things. I'm still learning how to run a business. There are bits of it where I will literally be looking at the CRM and the technology and that kind of thing, going, I don't get it. I don't get it. Yeah. I don't get it. And you can be close to tears because you're so far from your comfort zone. And you're thinking, I'm an intelligent person. I should be able to do this. Yeah. But it's just not your natural strength. Yeah. But as an entrepreneur, and until you get to that point where you can afford people to come in and take that skill off, you know, that requirement off you, you're going to spend a lot of time in places where you're trying to do tasks that don't make you feel good about yourself because you're not naturally gifted at them, because you have to be kind of like a jack of all trades, you know, and master of a few at least. But it's difficult. You're constantly finding yourself on shaky ground because you're learning a new piece of technology every day, and a new discipline and a new area, you know, and you've got to register for VAT, and then you've got to do corporate tax, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and it can be overwhelming. And I know from my own experience, and I'll put my hands up and say that my business is not as far ahead as it should be, because I get caught in cycles which I have to slap myself around the face and kind of break myself out of, where I'm working in the business rather than on the business. I'm doing the things that I really, really enjoy, which is having these conversations, and which is doing the podcast and doing the content and focusing on that. But I need to do so much more, you know, and I need to ration that good stuff, you know, the sugar of in my professional diet to work on the stuff that, you know, I need to go and do the broccoli, which is the, you know, the P&L, or I need to eat the Brussels sprouts, which is the learn how to do a content revenue management system, or that kind of thing, which is not glamorous and it's difficult to learn. Yeah,
Hunter, our Chief Information Officer, he calls it ice cream and vegetables. He's like, everyone has their ice cream, and I think this came from his wife even, but everyone has their ice cream, and you know, the stuff they love to do, and you know, no questions asked, I'll get it done, I'll do it quickly. And then there's the vegetables that take time, and you know, put it off, and it sounds like we all have our ice cream and vegetables. So
procrastination is really it's such an easy trap to fall into. And I know, because I've been there, you know, whether it's even when you're putting off that email to, you know, to a client that sometimes you need to have you need to have a difficult conversation with, and you just put it off, and you put it off, and you put it off. You have to do it. You have to have that conversation. And often you have to have that conversation with yourself, but it's very easy to bury yourself in the ice cream.
And get lost. So we talked a little bit about, we've mentioned our family, our wives and kids. The last 20 months, how has that impacted you, your relationship, right? Your relationship with your wife, your relationship with your
You're going to get me
daughter?
in trouble now.
No, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. I think it has changed. I mean, one of the things that COVID brought home to me, and I know COVID, the lockdown was very different for different people of different ages, but being able to be more present, just being in the same house as particularly my young daughter, was a gift for me, or I found it to be a gift.
And I completely agree.
So being an entrepreneur in the last 20 months, I've been able to be more flexible and more present, you know, whether it's Linny picking up from school, dropping off, there's the swimming gala, there's the music show, and I have turned around to clients and said, I cannot do this piece of work for you because I'm going to go to my, you know, to my daughter's music show. And you go to your daughter's music show, and it's magical and it's beautiful, and you know, it's just incredible for you. So from that perspective, I've loved being an entrepreneur because I have been more present for my child. In terms of my wife and I, that's an interesting one because there's less stability, you know. And again, she feels the emotional roller coaster as much as I, you know. And when I first sat down, I remember having this idea for Mentl just one night in the middle of the night. Saw the different strands of what it could be and where it could potentially generate revenue, which is obviously important as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just a passion project, but something that could potentially sustain itself.
Yeah.
And she immediately the next day when I mentioned to her, and I kind of mentioned to her sort of, you know, with a bit of trepidation, she said, no, go for it. And now I think we both recognize that this is something we want to keep doing if we can keep doing. But it is difficult, you know, and we have some challenging conversations.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
I mean, we've always had challenging. Every couple has challenging conversations, but that emotional roller coaster is felt on both sides.
Yeah.
And the difference, which is easy for me to say, but it's not as easy to live with, is that she has very little control over what happens.
Yeah.
So I have all the control. Because
you have more control. Yeah.
But that's true.
Yeah.
More, but
you don't. Yeah.
But I don't have control.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of
so
all right.
Someone who's slightly in control and someone that has no control. And
or at least
an interesting.
I see where we're going.
Yeah.
Whether or not we get there is a different matter. I mean, control is illusion anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it's not as important for me to have control. I am okay with being on the journey and seeing where it happens to a greater degree, and I don't get too overwhelmed. It's not that it happens, not that it never happens, but you know, I don't keep looking at the peak of the mountain and going, I have to climb there, I have to climb there, I have to climb there. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
Yeah.
But for Christina, like she doesn't see the roadmap. All she can do is trust that I know what I'm doing, and anyone knows me know that I don't know what I'm doing 95% of the time. So it's harder for her because she hasn't even got that illusion of control.
No, exactly.
She hasn't got the route map, and she doesn't know what. And I have to say as well, I'm not great at taking enough credit for where we actually are and what we've actually built.
Yeah. Again, celebrating the wins.
And celebrating the wins, or at least celebrating the progress.
Yeah.
So it's that is difficult, and you know you've got the reality of bills to pay.
Yeah.
And there will be times when your pipeline looks great, and there'll be times where your pipeline looks slim.
Yeah.
Or you know a big client will have promised you something, and then they turn around and you think you're there, you're home and dry, and you've put a lot of effort into that, possibly at the exclusion of chasing other business.
Yeah.
And then that falls down.
Yeah. They change their mind.
They change their mind,
leave, or whatever.
Or even halfway through a contract where you're looking at your pipeline and you're thinking, well, we're going to have guaranteed revenue for X, Y, and Z, and then the client goes cold on you, or something structurally changes inside because we work with big clients. It's something just structurally changes, and then all of a sudden that money that you thought you had coming in isn't coming in, and you're like, we've got school fees next month. So it's again, those emotions are linked to sometimes not existential, but it is. Yeah, it's challenging because
it's your livelihood, right?
And
you that could, of your wife and your kids.
And you could get to that point where you don't have enough money to keep going.
Yeah.
Even though like 6 months down the line, there's fields of glory waiting for you. Yeah. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that again, something that I have never really spoken about or had, I guess maybe the right people to speak to, or maybe if it just stuck within me, is that the strain it has on your marriage, on your or relationship if you're not married, in building a business is just insane. Yeah. And I think for the longest of times, I didn't fully appreciate my wife's perspective, right? Because you've summed it up so well. Like she's completely in the dark, not on purpose. Yeah. She has no control. She just has blind faith and trust because, well, she loves me, right? for her sins. Yeah. And that's another amount of pressure that you have on your shoulders. And I heard something today, a quote, something like the weight doesn't get heavier, your back gets stronger, or something like that.
Yeah, I like that.
And it is so true. But I feel as an entrepreneur and as a husband and as a father, you just keep taking on more weight and more responsibility. But it's very difficult to kind of get rid of that steam and that stress and that strain. And we know and we know that mental health is, a problem for many people.
Yeah.
But we also know there are very different, there are nuances, shall we say, maybe the differences between how men manage stress and strain and pressure and their mental health and women.
Yeah.
I think it's, for me, I never really appreciated well enough the direct impact of me building my business on my wife's mental health or just general health and well-being and that strain. And it's a tough one to manage. And I think whilst all marriages are different, all marriages are challenging, full stop, or have their challenges, should I say. Yeah. I don't think there's any greater challenge than being married and building a business and having kids at the same time. That's like the perfect storm. And I honestly don't know how, from my side, I don't know how we've gotten through it as well as we've done. It's a minor miracle.
And we're still going through that. We're still in the early stages of building. So, and again, it's interesting because I'm a mental health advocate, so I understand all the pressures.
Yeah.
And you can understand all the pressures and understand what needs to be done. And I could tell you what you need to do, Gary. Yeah. But will I follow my own advice?
Yeah, you're not doing it yourself.
And at our age, we've got a few things going on. From a physical perspective, so it's not all our own fault. Like, our bodies are beginning to slow down.
Yep.
We don't have the menopause, but we do. There is a version of that where our testosterone levels are dropping,
yep.
our energy levels are dropping. And that's where keeping hold of the fitness regime is really, really helpful.
Yep.
But equally, you talk about all those roles. We're the foundation of all of that, and all of that pressure that comes with the school fees and the ensuring your daughter's life's happy and ensuring that the rent or the mortgage can be paid.
Yeah.
And we, as entrepreneurs, I've never had to contemplate failure more than I've ever done. In the last 20 years.
Yeah.
You don't want to fail people around you.
No.
But actually, where business common sense was actually learn, get comfortable with failure.
Yeah.
I'm not yet. It still concerns me that I will or might fail. And what I guess the only step of evolution or progression I think I've found on this one is that previously it wouldn't have been on my radar. So I just kept going. Now I've got
it was a blind spot, but it's not anymore.
It was a blind spot. Yeah, I've never had to deal with it, really. Now I'm getting better at, you might fail, but you've got to keep going for it anyway.
Yeah.
And getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah. No, I think it's important again to shed light on it because whilst you're absolutely right in that you need to be Scott at work with your daughter, with your wife, it's hard.
Yeah.
Right? It's very hard. And you come off of calls or meetings or all day conferences, and then you go home, and then you've got to be Scott. You've gone from being Scott, the founder of Mentl and, MC and podcast host and all of this great stuff. And then you've got to go home and be Scott, the husband, and Scott, the father, and maybe Scott, the dishwasher as well, whatever other responsibilities you have to do, at home, which we all have. And it's hard. And I think
Christina won't let me wash the dishes because she says I'm terrible at it.
Well, yeah, that might be true. But, ultimately it is hard to kind of just completely switch modes. I think I said characters earlier, but maybe mode is probably a better point because your brain has to process that information, has to process the emotions. And I don't want, personally, I try my best not to take the stresses and strains of business home with me. But maybe that's a mistake. Maybe that's, a mistake that many people make in terms of trying to filter them and almost pretend they don't exist, but they do exist.
No, they
I think that's
absolutely
something that for me is a challenge in terms of the failure bit. I think Level has died probably 3 times in our existence. Either running out of cash, whether it's COVID and completely making our business model obsolete overnight. But like you say, it's that purpose and that grit and that resilience that keeps you going. And I think that has kind of made me more accepting of failure being a potential outcome. But weirdly, it motivates me a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like to almost prove myself wrong Not
No,
anyone else.
no,
Not
I
anyone else.
get
I'm not
it.
really,
No, I
I
get
don't
it.
really worry about what other people
Yeah.
think personally. It's more myself. How can I prove myself right and can I prove myself wrong? It's almost
Yeah.
like an internal battle.
No, I mean when we did the awards last year, I mean that was kind of overwhelming. There was so much work that went into it. And this is a very UE thing, I think. But the morning of the last day for entries, we had 4 entries on the morning. And this is a Saturday, and it's a public holiday.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, all that marketing, all that organisation, it hasn't worked. No one's interested.
Yeah.
You know. And then on the last day, and I went out to brunch, and I'm not ashamed to confess I had a few drinks to try and drown the sorrows, so to speak, and just have a good time and just go, do you know what? I'll just shake it off.
Yeah.
And then the phone started pinging, and pinging, and pinging, and pinging, and pinging. And by the end of the day, we'd had nearly 70 entries, in a single day for the first award. So
On a Saturday.
On a Saturday,
Yeah.
which was also, I think it was the Prophet's birthday as well. So it was, it was a long weekend.
Yeah.
So you went from, in a single day, you went from rock bottom, having been a failure, having put so much work into this thing and it's failed, to, oh God, we're back on,
we're back in business, yeah.
And again, it's
tough.
well, what are we doing this for?
It's tough.
But
Good question.
I know
Good
why.
question.
But I know why we're doing it for. Again, I come back to that fact that this is the best job I've ever had.
Yeah.
And that purpose, I know I'm living to my values.
Yeah. And I think not only is this the best job I've ever had, it's the only job I ever want.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very
It's a really good way of putting it.
privileged position actually to be in, because not many people get to experience that sensation.
Yeah.
But I don't ever want to pretend that it's easy. I think that's the bit that I've gotten better at, because I was terrible at this, and I got criticized by the level team actually. So thank you, level team. But I would always try and spin things positively. I'm a self-confessed
You call
eternal
yourself
optimist,
eternal
right?
optimist, yeah.
And that I always thought was a strength or a superpower. But actually, I would take a bad day and try and spin it positively for the team in hope that I would help them feel better. But actually, I was just probably making them feel worse because I was masking the truth, right? Particularly in the raising capital phases of the business, where they want good news. But if there's no good news, don't pretend.
Yeah.
And I think actually some of the best reactions or responses to updates that I've shared is when I've said, sorry guys, it's been a flat day, no news. But it's completely honest, completely transparent. And I had a great call with another mental health platform in the UK actually yesterday, a platform called Hope.
Okay,
They're doing incredible things, and they're in startup fundraising mode, exactly the same as you are and as we still are, because we still consider Level as a startup and in fundraising mode. That never ends. But the point I made to them was my biggest lesson in this journey internally with the team is that transparency and that honesty, because if you try and not bend the truth, but if you try and mask it and shine it up, polish it up, then it doesn't help.
Yeah, my dad was a classic example of that, though, because he pushed things away. He had his suit of armor on, and he often prided himself in his physical attributes. But the minute that mental health came along, that challenge came along, he literally had no defense of it. I was laughing or smiling because it's something I saw recently, and it kind of reminded me so much of what you're talking about, which is there's the movie called Inside Out. Which is all about the emotions inside. Yeah. And they've got Joy, I think the main character is just constantly wants the child to be happy all the time. Yeah. Joy, 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 joy. There can be no sadness. Joy, 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 joy. And actually, the whole point of the movie is that actually both are required. And both need to be recognized and acknowledged. And it's that there's a lot of toxic positivity out there. A good friend of mine, Derek, he often talks about that, and he works in a startup and he helps startups find money. But he talks about that toxic positivity. This is only ever going to work, and this only ever goes right. It's no, and there's days when it doesn't. And sometimes you don't want to admit it to yourself, let alone other people.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, and this is just my view, so probably need to add a disclaimer to the description here, but I think in raising capital, particularly venture capital, you almost have to pretend that you're something that, or a lot of people feel they have to pretend they're something that they're not, whether that's them as a leader or them as a business or them as a team. And I've found, actually, as we've done it more, the more honest we are about what we're great at, but actually what we're not good at yet, has been where I've had the best conversations and ultimately raised money.
Right.
And I think that's been a journey, again, that I've had to go on in terms of, I don't need to pretend that every metric is going up by 100% month on month. Actually, we did one thing and we churned a client or we lost some members this month because it didn't work. And actually, if we're honest and we share that learning, then it actually has been a more positive conversation. So me managing that eternal optimism, and I am naturally optimistic. That's not just a facade. That's just who I am. But actually, it's how do I regulate that and manage that to good effect has been a real challenge. So, like I said, there's so many emotions and internal battles. Like you said, the inside out reference is, it's hard. Just lastly, we talked a little bit about physical health. Mentl is a mental health advocacy and content platform. How has your mental health suffered? Where have you suffered in the 20 months of building Mentl the most? Where have you suffered the most?
So much anxiety at times, whether something's going to work or not. Sometimes getting overwhelmed. I had to go, preventatively, thankfully, but it was a great decision to take, which was to go and actually have some therapy sessions.
I was going to say, do you practice what you preach?
I'm getting better at it. I would not say I'm anywhere where I need to be, but I went and saw a psychologist and had some sessions, which really helped me kind of reset and just keep going. Because it would have been very easy throughout the awards just to go, this is too much and I can't do it. And again, I'm going to go again as a proactive thing. I'm literally next week I'm seeing a psychologist again to go and do a little bit of because I've got about 3 months where I really just want to go for it. I just want to optimize. I just want to go, how can I be the best over the next 3 months? Because they're going to be every quarter is always critical for any business, but I really need to focus on this in the next 3 months. So it's okay. So how can I deal with that? Because there is a massive amount of anxiety. I didn't give up on the imposter syndrome. I just got better at tuning out that person inside that tells me that I'm crap at everything and I'm going to fail.
Or you've actually just become an expert or a leader in your field, perhaps.
Maybe.
Maybe
one day, maybe Scott will be able to admit that to himself. I'm not sure.
I'll invite you back on again, and you'll be able to admit it. I'll tell you that you have. And
so
I think
it has. And again, like I say, the emotions, because the emotional swings are so much that it doesn't take much for you to go, right, I just think I want to have a good cry right now. And I think that's also where the physical exercise really, really helps, because sometimes you'll have it inside.
Absolutely.
And just getting out, whether it be walking or cycling or running or swimming, it almost it's a way of exorcising, that demon inside. You just work it out of the system rather than just sitting and stewing with it, because it doesn't go away. And, I've been fortunate that this job continues to put me in learning environments, whether it be learning around meditation, which I don't do enough of, or learning about yoga, which is I actually really, really enjoy, or learning about the benefits of exercise, or learning different tools. I've just been to Japan, and they've got this concept of ikigai, and I'm reading the book Ikigai right now, which is all about purpose. And we sat there and did the tea ceremony, and it really resonated with me, because that's Ichigo Ichii, which is all about one meeting, one moment. And that, again, it's mindfulness. It's that being able to recognize the win. So I'm in a great job that puts me into environments where I can learn and get better at it. But boy, do you need to, because again, working for other people, it's the stability there. Let's be honest, you've got stability there. You don't worry from paycheck to paycheck. Whereas working for yourself, there's always a little voice at the back of your head that's just kind of screaming at any given point in absolute terror. In the back of your mind, which there are days where you can go for weeks not listening to it, but the minute things start going, hey, that voice is back again, going, it's all going wrong. It's there all the time.
Yeah.
And you've just got to get better at not listening to it.
Yeah. No, I think you mentioned a point around exorcising, and yeah, for me that's always been an absolute avenue for kind of mental health and emotional regulation for me. Exercise is a non-negotiable daily, actually, and I've gotten better over time where it doesn't have to be super high intensity exercise every single day. It just needs to be movement, because actually not only do I manage stress through that process, oftentimes it's actually where I do some of my best thinking, and not on purpose. It just naturally happens. So I think that kind of prioritization and kind of having those non-negotiables is so important.
See, that feels like
that's
a lesson that you've learned over time, and it's a trap that I have definitely fallen into as well over the last 20 months, which is you've now learned to put in a boundary.
Yeah.
And you've got a non-negotiable, which is that time where when you first start your business, you're saying yes to everything. Yeah. And you have no boundaries whatsoever. Yeah. And there's only so long you can live with that before it begins to really take its toll. Yeah. You're all over the shop. So having that, that ritual to come back to, that non-negotiable, that I see the value of that. Yeah. I've still, you're the Zen master, and I'm
not quite.
I'm the grasshopper on that one.
Yeah, I think. I'm still learning, but same on sleep, right? So I used to be of the opinion that you can sleep when you're dead. That was a terrible attitude to have. But that was how I don't know whether that was. It wasn't. I can't even blame my upbringing because I wasn't taught that. It's just an attitude that I'd developed over time, and as I, built businesses at university, which was, my first business at university, which was probably, on one hand, a great environment to build a business, but on the other hand, again, sleep was never really, a priority for anybody. It would be do everything you possibly can and into the early hours of the morning, and then do the same again the next day, and
eat, sleep, repeat.
Drink more Coca-Cola or Red Bull, and figure it out.
Other energy drinks are available.
Don't drink any of them. Actually, would be my advice
better,
now. Yeah. So, I think sleep has become a massive part of how I optimize performance, because recovery, and going back to the athlete or the professional sports team example or analogy, is that if you don't get the recovery right, if you don't get the preparation right, you will not get the performance. And I think that's the bit that I am getting better at. I'm definitely not a Zen master on it, but I have a heightened awareness of how important it is. And I've become so much better at, one, prioritizing sleep, and two, actually getting the quantity and quality of sleep I need. Yeah. I went from being like a 4-hour a night kind of guy to now an 8-hour a night kind of guy. And that's a big swing. Yeah. When you're not used to or programmed to spend much time in bed and enabling your body and your mind to recover. But guess what? I run a well-being technology business, and if I'm not doing the basics, just the basics, and sleep absolutely has to be on the basics list. If I'm not doing the basics well enough, then I'm a massive hypocrite. So I'm lucky that I have that kind of external stimuli or pressure now to kind of make sure that I practice what we preach at level. So we've talked a lot about challenges and maybe what you could label negative emotions, but tell me something that's made you really happy, given you a real immense sense of joy in the last 20 months, in building Mentl.
I think the proudest, the thing I enjoyed the most, which was the mountain, was again on the night of the awards. My daughter, 8 years old, being there, seeing the event,
front and center,
coming on stage with me, presenting awards, sharing that with her, and sharing that conversation about mental health with her. Yeah. And that kindness and well-being and mental health is something that can and should be celebrated. Yeah. That literally was, heart exploded that night. So that's given me joy, immense joy. And there are other things, you know, there are wins every day, which I don't give myself enough credit for, but you'll get, and sometimes it feels like people are writing to somebody else again, but someone will write on LinkedIn just going, "You're doing incredible work, Scott, thank you." Or that post was, you know, that podcast, that inspiring person you spoke to on that podcast really is just giving me hope. Or it's just, and that's just like, oh yeah, that feels good, you know. And I did this weird Clifton, well, it's not weird, but there's this Clifton Strengths thing. A friend of mine was, Donal was training to be a Clifton Strengths coach, so he put me through the program. And I was like, so I answered the question. You've got about 3 seconds to answer every question. And comes back with this report, and you looked at it, and the first time, and it's talking about strengths. The first time I read it, I was like, well, that's nonsense. And then the second time I read it, I was like, wow, that's what witchcraft is this? That I did in fact cry when I read it, and because there was stuff in it that was absolutely bang on. But then the third time I read it, it was like, oh, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So it's not that, you know, and sometimes I don't think we recognize that enough. It's just like, all right, you're not going to be happy every day. You're not going to be joyful every day. But over time, you were actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. You know, again, that ikigai idea of you know, the Japanese concept of purpose. Like, you know, there's this scientific report in somewhere going, the activities you're doing on a daily basis, this is what you're good at. This is what you were supposed to be doing. And then that, when you kind of return to that awareness, because you don't have it all the time. But, you know, and right now I'm actually feeling quite good about it because I'm recognizing it for once again. It's like, this is the right thing to be doing. And long may it continue.
And I think that whilst we talk about moments of joy or happiness, actually just joy and happiness come from you serving your purpose, right? And or fulfilling your purpose, maybe a better way of putting it. So
it's also the great privilege, and this is I'm gonna sound, I'm not going to use a swear word, but, you know, pretentious or precocious or whatever you want to call it, but there's something that you genuinely get. I mean, we see this in mental health research all the time as well. Is like doing something for somebody else is incredibly powerful. So to run a project or a business that can actually help and has some positive impact in the world, that adds some value to the world, rather than, you know, I worked in a profession that I did always try and be a campaigning journalist and help people. That always seemed to be important to me. But, you know, we're so used to taking, you know, rather than giving. You know, we somehow think that, you know, the world owes us a living, and the world owes, and we live in an amazing place where we've got so much opportunity and so many things to take. But having a job where you're able to give is quite powerful.
No, definitely. So we've talked about Mentl, we've talked about your early years, and we've talked about imposter syndrome as well. How has Mentl and building Mentl crafted either a new identity for Scott or shaped your identity? Like, how has that impacted your overall identity, and how do you see yourself now?
I believe in myself a lot more than I ever have. And that's a journey still. But the ability for me to back myself and stand up for myself in the world has massively improved. So there's fear, but there is less fear. And it's the fear of the unknown and the fear of the unexpected, of the adventure, shall we say, that we're on, which is exhilarating. And you know, it's like being literally on the roller coaster, as opposed to that kind of toxic fear of anxiety that somehow I'm never going to be good enough and I'm never going to be able to do this and I'm not achieving my, like, God, even if this all comes crumbling down tomorrow, and I'm really hoping it doesn't, but at least I know I went for it. And there's something I will take. Scott will always go, yeah, but you had the courage to do that. And you actually inspired. I've got two amazing shareholders, Mark and Arjun, who put me, you know, on the road to this. And it's like, but Scott, you were also able to inspire them to back you. You know, they've been brilliant and they've been great mentors. But at the same time, Scott, give yourself some credit. You know, you came up with this concept. You've been on this journey for 21 months. Like, you've built something that, I think in our first year, we reached about 1 million people, you know, across all our different platforms, which, you know, is small beans compared to any of the major media titles. I saw actually our engagement, my engagement on LinkedIn went up about something like 3,000% when I started doing what I was passionate about. Even though I was working for mainstream titles that had much bigger audiences, when I started just doing what I'm supposed to be doing, people lent in and people engaged. It's like, you've done, So it's as you said, coming back to recognizing those wins. I think Scott is actually a braver person, and I think he knows himself a little bit better than he used to.
I think it's easy for people, the thousands, and I know you have a big following now on LinkedIn, and you're very active, and like I said, I love seeing the content that you post as well, because I'm a big believer in it, and also a believer that it's needed, right? But it's also very easy for people to think that, Scott's got it all together, he knows what he's doing, he's super confident, and you do come across as very confident on stage or on your podcast, rightly so, because you're brilliant at doing that. But what people don't see is what's going on the inside, right? And I think that's the important bit to also kind of shed light on, is that, whilst it may look like you have it all together, or I have it all together, we really don't. And I think, or certainly we don't all the time. And there's a trap you can fall into, like I said earlier, around kind of like the eternal optimism or toxic positivity, maybe you may want to call it, but making everything look glamorous and glossy and brilliant, when actually sometimes it's just, quite frankly, shit.
I mean, I love, there's Tash, who runs Tish Tash Communications, a PR agency. She's very open and honest, like warts and all, and she talks about running a business and the mental strain on her and how it talks. And I try to talk about that as well, particularly at times. I mean, it's very easy to get lost in that. And you're right, like minutes before I'll go on stage, I'll be screaming in terror, internally, even though I've done it a million times. And even though I know theoretically this is not going to kill me, that whole flight or fight thing, there isn't actually a line in the room that's going to kill me. All I'm going to do is go on stage, and for half an hour, maybe nobody laughs at my incredibly bad dad jokes, but maybe one or two people will listen. But it's scary every time. It's scary every time, and that then also creates that. It's scary. You overcome the fear, and for a minute, it's brilliant, and then it's bang, crash again. And sometimes we'll do 2 or 3 events in a day. So then you've got to pick yourself up. So you go through the whole anxiety, adrenaline, fight or flight.
Reach the top of the mountain.
Crash.
Cliff dive again.
Crash. Again. So by the end of the day, you can be absolutely just like exhausted, like mentally exhausted. It can be.
And then you go again the next day.
The next day.
Same intensity.
I went through, I think February as well. Like I literally had a week or 2 weeks where I must have done 5 podcasts, 4 live events, or 4 live MCing events for hours as well, for like 8 hours a day. And then more events as a speaker on those panels. At the end of those 2 weeks, you just literally done it bang, 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 bang. I was like, and that was the week that we both went to Riyadh and did that, and then I came back and did the Wellbeing Conference here as well. Both great experiences, but
they're draining. They're draining. I think, like I said, it's important, purpose, or one of the main purposes of this podcast is to really shed light on the inner workings of building a business and the toll it takes. Right? I think that's the toll it takes on your health, your well-being, your family, your relationships, your life. And I genuinely believe that those who build businesses are the crazy ones who are willing to take tremendous sacrifice for, in our case, impacting people's lives in a positive way. And whilst we celebrate the impact it has on people's lives, we kind of ignore the negative impact, largely speaking, that it can have on our own. So it's a very, I'm sure we could talk for a very long time about this, but I have one final question, and it's related to Mentl in the future. You've done 20 months. What does the next 20 months look like? What does the future look like for Mentl as a business or a platform or an ecosystem?
Well, we're rolling out a series of, the awards will be back this year, which I'm really looking forward to.
Excellent.
So that should be, that's going to be bigger and better this year as well, because that's open to the entire GCC and projects from the wider Middle East as well. So
please, everybody apply before the last Saturday this year.
If you could.
To help Scott's sanity, yeah.
Literally, yeah, please, that would be really nice. But then we're also entering into a lot more partnerships as well for us to be able to offer kind of more coordinated, because there's so many great people such as yourselves as well that are doing brilliant stuff, and I think that we should just kind of like bandy together.
100%,
and, the rising tide lifts all boats. So we're going to be announcing a series of partnerships so that Mentl can, we are brilliant at telling stories and crafting a narrative, and often we see organizations will embrace well-being but then not talk about it, and not tell their story. So it's delivered in isolation, whereas what we do is take that project and go, right, okay, let's craft a narrative around that as well as build a strategy. But while we're doing that, do you need technology level? Do you need psychologists? Do you need this? What do you need? So we're going to be rolling out those partnerships. It's going to be an exciting year, I think, because I'm hoping we're going to grow this year, but I would take survival.
Scott, thank you very much for coming in. It is absolutely no coincidence that in the past 18, 20 months that the topic of mental health has elevated in people's awareness, in businesses' awareness. We know that there is an insane amount of burnout struggle here in the region, stress, anxiety, mental health, the spiraling cost of mental health as part of medical insurance. It's genuinely insane, but it's absolutely no coincidence that people are talking about it more openly, more honestly, myself included. Thanks to this guy who doesn't think he should be doing it. But he absolutely should. There's very clearly, you have found your purpose. You have found your ikigai, if you want to use, the Japanese terminology. It is very, very clear because you are brilliant at it. We are grateful for it. I've been to your events. I've been to listen to your podcast. I've been privileged to see your journey and your rise, and I look forward to it continuing because we all need it. The UAE needs it. The region needs it, and as long as you can keep enjoying it, I'm absolutely convinced that you'll be tremendously successful. So thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Gary.
So a big thank you to Scott today for being such an incredible guest, for going so deep into his personal journey and in building Mentl. If you'd like to follow Mentl, you can follow them on Instagram at mentl.space, and Mentl is MENTL.space. That's also their domain, mentl.space. Please also follow Scott on Instagram. You'll see great content. You'll see all of his podcasts, and he has some incredible guests on the Mentl Space podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and please follow the journey of Well On Our Way. Thank you.